Welcome, football world. I am Bucky Brooks. This is the Bucky Brooks Show. And every time I'm ready to do an all NFL show, something happens that brings me back in to talk about the Jaguars. And the latest thing that took place, and it boggles my mind because there's been a lot of hate, a lot of discourse about the Jags and what they didn't get done over the course of the offseason. But this has my blood boiling. The fact that NFL.com ranked the Jags, they graded them. They gave them an F for their offseason. And there's a tweet that went out. They kind of sent up the bad signal to all the people in Duval. 1010XL, which is the flagship station of Jaguars football down in Jacksonville. They tweeted out that the Jaguars really have the worst offseason in the NFL. My guy, Ryan Hacker Green, broke it down, talked about the NFL.com putting an F for the Jaguars offseason. And the conversation was so compelling that I went and read the piece that Matt Okada, who works for NFL.com, like I work for NFL.com, he decided to torch the Jags for all the things that they didn't do over the course of the offseason. And his main points of contention were Travis Etienne walking out the door after a 1,000-yard season. They didn't re-sign him to a deal. And Devin, Lloyd, who was one of the guys that was being talked about being a defensive player of the year for most of the year, they didn't re-sign him. And I will say I understand why there's so much conversation about those two guys going out the door. Travis Etienne had played at a high level for the Jacksonville Jaguars, particularly over the last 3 years. When you look at some of his numbers were within range of what Christian McCaffrey was doing for the San Francisco 49ers in terms of scrimmage yards and putting up big numbers as a runner and a receiver. And he was a big part of an offense that has some explosive capabilities. But he was an older running back. He was on the second contract. And we've seen in this league, a lot of teams aren't willing to give a running back a second contract because you're just saying like the mileage, the wear and tear, normally it doesn't end up being a good return on investment. And that was the thinking in Jacksonville. And the other thinking was maybe Travis left a lot of meat on the bone when it came to some of the runs, particularly inside the tackles. And they felt like maybe they could find someone that could give them more bang for the buck as an inside runner as they really want to beef up this running game, particularly because they had so many struggles in short yardage situations. So that might have been some of the conversation that existed in the building. Devin Lloyd, I think people have to go all the way back and remember he was a first-round pick. In those first few seasons of his career, he didn't really put up numbers. There was conversation about him being out of position, conversations that they kind of miss in terms of like him not being able to fulfill what they thought he would be able to be. I would say that maybe he was played out of position those early years, but last year, going into training camp and going into the preseason, he was in a competition for his job. And even though he played well, 5 interceptions, made a bunch of splash plays that helped the defense, that had a terrific turnover prowess, play at a high level. I don't know if the Jaguars, I get the sense that the Jaguars didn't believe that he was going to be able to bring that same kind of production year after year after year. And so even though he played well, he was viewed internally maybe as a bit of a one-year wonder. And so they were okay parting ways with him if he got a bigger deal. The other part that I think people have to talk about in context when it comes to the Jags, when you let those guys walk, you did it with the intention of being able to re-sign some of your own guys that were key players for your team. If you look at the offseason, first domino that goes is Montre Brown re-signs with the team. He signs a 3-year, $33 million deal to continue to be the number 2 corner on the edges. And even though he is not a household name, I can tell you Buster Brown had played well, 22 starts over the last 2 seasons. Last year, he really stepped up, showed that he could play in this zone-based system, and his length, his athleticism, and more importantly, his feistiness fits what the Jaguars want to do on defense. The other domino that fell was Trayvon Walker re-signed, former number 1 overall pick. It was time for him to re-up. We saw his draft mate, Aiden Hutchinson, sign a blockbuster deal. Trayvon Walker follows in suit. 4-year, $110 million, a lot of guaranteed money. And people were upset because they were like, hey, he only had 3.5 sacks last year. But what I got to tell you is he was a big part of the reason why the Jaguars had the number 1 rush defense and one of the reasons why they were able to force opponents to play one-dimensional, because on early downs, they stopped the run, They forced you to throw against the pass rushing coverage that they wanted to, and they were able to dictate the terms for so much of the game because Trayvon Walker and others were able to stop the run, not really give opponents any life, and they forced opponents to play on their terms. When you are a number 1 overall pick and you have lived up to the billing, you are going to get paid. But for him to get paid, they had to find a way to save some money elsewhere. And so when you really think about this, the 2 positions that I talked about, Montre Brown being corner, Trayvon Walker being a defensive end pass rusher, those are premium positions. The positions that walked out the door, running back and linebacker, they're non-premium positions. In the team building process, we talk about valuing positions differently. And a lot of time the value comes on how they impact the passing game. More importantly, how do they impact the quarterback? 2 of the guys that the Jaguars elected to pay and pay big money to, they directly impact the quarterback. Montre Brown being able to cover number 1 and number 2s takes away options for the quarterback. And then Trayvon Walker, not only being a dominant run defender, but being able to put up double digits in sacks like he's done before, that impacts how the quarterback has to play. So that was essential. The final piece of the puzzle, when we talk about what they elected to do with the money that they saved from Travis and Devin Lloyd, Brenton Strange to tight end. I believe Brenton Strange is going to be one of the top tight ends in the league when you finally get a chance to see him do his thing in 2026. Last year, he teased us 46 catches, 540 yards, 3 touchdowns in 12 games. He showed that he could be a big-time playmaker in this offense, an offense that is loaded with playmakers on the outside where Trevor Lawrence can just find the open man and let the ball go there. Well, by bringing Brenton Strange back, you have someone that can command attention over the middle of the field. He can take advantage of those double coverage looks that you're getting on the outside to neutralize Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, or Parker Washington. The cover 2 creates big opportunities down the middle. More importantly, he's a mismatch creator with his athleticism in space. He can line up in the slot. He can line up out wide. He's too fast and physical for defensive backs. He can outmaneuver linebackers down the seam. So he's a terrific option over the middle field, which is what they want. Remember, we talked about the guys on your team that are your premium players. They're the ones that impact the quarterback the most. When we think about the impactful players that have been re-signed, Trayvon Walker impacting the quarterback as a rusher, Montre Brown impacting the quarterback as a cover guy, and then Brenton Strange impacting your own quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, by giving him a weapon over the middle of the field. So to me, I don't really understand the F because that is a failing grade. And in issuing a failing grade, it was signaled that the team is falling apart. This team by no means is falling apart. Look no further than the odds at our FanDuel Sportsbook, and it tells you, it suggests that, look, the odds are solid for the Jaguars when it comes to regular season wins. You talk about over 7.5, look, minus 240. That's saying they are locking on them to go over that. Under plus 190, that's not going to happen. Over 8.5, minus 140. Again, the books are telling you that this team is going to win and they're going to win a lot. You can see the rest of the numbers that FanDuel Sportsbook is encourage you to kind of lay a wager on. And why wouldn't you place a wager on a team that was 13-4 a season ago and won the AFC South? To me, I am all in on the Jaguars, maybe not improving upon the record that they had last year, but certainly being one of the top teams in the league. And this is the reason why I'll go all in on them. Anyone who's been around the program has heard about the offseason work that this team has put in, and namely the way that Trevor Lawrence has shown greater command of this offense. When we talk about impacting the game and impacting teams in terms of their win total, there are 2 people that are probably the most impactful: quarterback, head coach. When we talk about the quarterback last year, he was an MVP finalist. When you look at the last 7 games, he was nothing short of sensational. 18 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, passer rating of 109.6. That is near the top of the charts in the league for the work that he was able to do. When you also look at the way that he suddenly started to develop the chemistry with his guys on the perimeter. Jacoby Myers comes over from the Las Vegas Raiders, kind of solidifies the position in terms of being a dirty work guy. Parker Washington emerges as a big playmaker, a guy who could and probably should have been a Pro Bowl punt returner, but he steps up and shows that he can be a solid number 2, number 3 when given those opportunities. Brian Thomas Jr., because there's been a lot of conversation about Brian Thomas Jr. having a subpar year, but then when you go and study it, his yards per catch average was exactly the same as his rookie season when we were ready to anoint him one of the top 5 receivers in the league. Even though the receiving yards weren't what we expected them to be, the big play production, the explosive plays that we wanted to see from him, he still delivered. Now, here's what's even more encouraging about the offense. Look, this is an offense that didn't play with Travis Hunter. And even though he's slated to probably play more corner than wide receiver, there's still going to be packages for him to be on the field. The number 2 overall pick didn't play much for the Jaguars, didn't have a chance to really impact the game. And so now we're talking about a wide receiver core that has 4 legitimate options on the perimeter: Travis Hunter, Brian Thomas Jr., Jacoby Myers, and Parker Washington. You also have Brenton Strange playing tight end, who can give you those opportunities to spread it out, create mismatches, do a bunch of different things to really make the game easy for the quarterback. Offensive line continues to gel because everyone returns intact, and you're not going to have the musical chairs that we saw for part of the season when you're trying to figure out what to do with Cole Van Lannon, who deserves to be in the first 5. They figured that part out. The question mark is obviously going to be running back because Travis Etienne goes out the door. You bring in Chris Rodriguez from the Washington Commanders. He is someone that is built for the system, built to do the dirty work, but he may not have the pizzazz that we're talking about or that we're used to seeing from a number 1 running back. With Bashal Tootin, LaQuint Allen, and others kind of vying for playing time, this is going to be a by-committee situation, which is really common for guys that operate this Shanahan and McVay system. We have seen them do it with 1 star kind of commanding it. That would be Christian McCaffrey doing it like he's done it for the San Francisco 49ers for years. But we've also seen the San Francisco 49ers use a variety of players kind of filling in complementary roles. The Jaguars are probably subscribing to that theory where they feel like 3 guys will kind of give you the production that walked out the door when Travis Etienne took off to go to New Orleans, and they feel more confident that they may be able to get some of that dirty work done on those early downs to stay on schedule and to keep this offense out of harm's way. Now, that's a legitimate question mark. If you want to downgrade the Jaguars for not taking a running back early, so be it. But that's not an F. Because you do that, that might be like, hey, let's knock them down to a B-, even if you give them a C, but you can't give them an F for what they've done. Then when you look at the other side, because there's a lot of conversation about the defense and the draft and what they needed. Oh, they needed pass rushers. Oh, you got to get someone to replace Devin Lloyd. You don't get that done because when people look at the draft, the first thing that comes to mind is, look, they took Nate Boracher in the 2nd round. And because the lightly regarded tight end from Texas A&M didn't have a lot of pass catching production, and he goes early in the 2nd round, there are people that have completely dismissed whatever the Jags did in the draft because the quote-unquote consensus board didn't have the Texas A&M standout as a guy that should come off the board in the 2nd round. I have told you what has been said throughout the league. I've talked to people who said he was not going to be there in the 3rd round. The reason why the Jaguars wanted him is because we've seen an uptick in 12 and 13 personnel. The Jaguars want to play more 12 and 13 personnel because it would give them a different look. It would give them an opportunity to challenge defenses in a different way. And as they're looking to up the running game while also adding more explosiveness to the passing game, sometimes you line up in heavy sets to create the big plays. But to do that, you have to have 2 viable threats at tight end to be able to get it done. Also, and I talked to Tony Baselli about this, they said it was interesting in looking at Boracher when he was at Texas A&M. Even though he didn't get a lot of catches, when they needed to make a play, the ball ended up in his hands. They talked about 2-point red zone conversions where he was able to make plays, particularly against Notre Dame. They believe that he is going to be a guy that really outplays his draft status, given what he's able to do as a blocker and as a pass receiver. More importantly, his presence on the field allows them to move around Brenton Strange. People won't understand that until we kind of see it play out. But that's the thought behind why it was so important for them to get him in the 2nd round. And then they double back and got another tight end, Tanner Golzil, to allow them to be able to play some of the 13 personnel looks that really the Rams popularized, but have really given people a lot of problem. So as this league goes big, the Jaguars felt like they wanted to get the tight ends that they wanted, not settle for. So that's why you saw him go off the board. Now, the other conversation around the draft is who's Albert Regis? Why they get an undersized defensive tackle? Why wouldn't they get a big body to go inside? Mason Smith goes out the door. What are they doing? Well, they wanted an Energizer Bunny on the inside. And the reason why is because they felt like they needed something different at the point of attack, not only to upgrade the pass rush, but to make sure they could be more disruptive against the run. When you look at Regis, one of the things that you can't dispute when you watch the tape, the energy, the effort is always there. He is a balls to the wall player. And you certainly like that as you talk about the edge that this defense plays with. Remember, they were the number one rush defense in football, but they want to get more sacks, more pressure, more production, more disruptive plays. But when you have a guy that is a little undersized, but plays with more quickness and agility, as opposed to brute strength and power, you're saying that, hey, we're going to move the guys at the line of scrimmage. We're going to get them on the move, and they're going to slip through the cracks and the crevices to find a way to blow up plays in the backfield. Then when you go, and I think the biggest pick to me was Emanuel Pregnon. Emanuel Pregnon coming out of Oregon was someone that was highly regarded. People had talked about him at the bottom of the first. For sure, he was expected to be gone in the second round. Well, when you take him and you take Boracher, you're saying we want to be a more physical team at the point of attack. And even though Pregnon is not slated for duty as a rookie to be a starter, we just kind of know how these things play out. Don't be surprised to see him kind of get an opportunity at the middle to the end of the year. And when you put him and Boracher on the field at the same time, when now you up the ante in terms of your physicality and the way that you want to play, particularly in the run game. To me, that was a great pick. Now, some of the other picks, people can debate. Wesley Williams was a high energy, high motor guy coming from Duke. I had a chance to see him at the East-West Shrine Bowl. He was one of the people that they talked about ad nauseum in terms of the way that he impacted it, how hard he practiced, and what he's able to do. He could be a nice find for the Jags in the fourth round. Now, once you get past the fourth round, we're talking about developmental guys. You're throwing darts, hoping that someone is going to stick. The two wide receivers that they took, Josh Coleman and those guys, they are hoping that their size, their production, their return ability gives them something to fill out the bottom part of their wide receiver core. Already told you, they're locked and loaded with four guys at wide receiver. One of those other guys has to be a returner, and then the other person has to be able to play and contribute on special teams. As you're putting the team together, it is not always about putting the number ones and number twos on the field. Some of that is about having enough depth that allows those players that you're saying are your depth players to get jerseys on Sunday. When you only can dress out 45, 46 guys, you got to make sure that the backups have a way of contributing on special teams while also being able to man those positions. Some of these guys that we're talking about, they're taken with their special teams talents in mind while hoping that they can develop into being capable backups that eventually turn into key contributors or more. As I look at this discourse that everyone is having about the Jaguars and why they're going to fall apart and why this wasn't a great offseason for them, I would just say it's misguided. It's misguided because when your team that won was extremely successful a year ago, 13-4, what you're really thinking about doing is how can we upgrade the bottom of the roster? Because the holes are certainly not as glaring as some of the other teams in the league. Some of the players that you're getting are for really specific roles and responsibilities that you need to take care of to help your team go to the next level. And even though I'm saying, I don't know if the Jags would be able to match that 13-4 record, they could be a better team, and they will be a better team in year two with Liam Cohen, but they may have a worse record because the schedule is harder and it's different going from being the hunter to the hunted. That said, it is about putting yourself in a position to be a better team in the postseason. And when I look at these moves based on the intel that I'm getting from inside the building and what my eyes are telling me with the roster, yeah, this team certainly doesn't deserve an F for what they did in the offseason. Now, you may not like who they took. You may not like how they elected to how they opted for some of those veterans to walk out, but you certainly can't dispute how good this team is, particularly after year one of what Liam Cohen did with a team that was lightly regarded, that ended up winning the division. I'm going to reserve judgment until we get to the preseason and training camp and we can see how the pieces of the puzzle fit. But to give them an F and look, man, I went to college, I graduated, I did all this stuff. I understand pass, fail, and what it requires. There is no way you can give the Jaguars a failing mark for the work that they've done in the offseason. Just by re-signing their own players who've been good players, that puts you above an F. But the great thing about these things is we can talk about it, we can debate about it, but at the end of the day, the rubber is going to meet the road when we have an opportunity to kick it off in the regular season. And I, like many of my buddies from Duval, are excited about what the Jags are going to do in year 2 of the Liam Cohen era. That's why I know we're going to have plenty of fun bringing back these Fs in NFL.com's faces. So until next time, when we have an opportunity to talk about the Jags and all the excitement that we have for training camp, I'm Bucky Brooks. This is the Bucky Brooks Show. Make sure you check out all the cool stuff that we're doing on Believe. Make sure you check out some of the other things that my colleagues are doing, because we got some cool stuff going on. And come back here for not only all your Jags news, but all the things that are going on in the NFL. We are going to talk about some rankings and how the teams should be aligned going into the training camp over the next 2 weeks. Until then, I'm Bucky Brooks, and I'm out.